In 1999, despite Western hopes for a new democratic and cooperative state, Russia had fallen into a period of turmoil. Rapid economic reforms, coupled with political conflict among both the citizens and leaders of the nation since the collapse of the USSR, had thrown the infantile federation into a period of instability. To make things worse, Russia had just faced a financial crisis in 1998, which had crashed the value of the ruble. Politically, Yeltsin had limited the powers of the Duma, Russia's parliament, and strengthened the control of the presidency, a move dubiously controversial at best. His term had seen a period of initial unity that had later collapsed into disarray. Seeing some of the worst events in modern Russian history, such as the 1993 constitutional crisis, as well as a defeat in the First Chechen War, which lasted from 1994 to 1996. Throughout his presidency, his approval ratings had significantly fallen, and any aspirations of his for a continued future in politics had reached their end. In the region of the Caucasus, the southernmost frontier of Russia, pockets of insurgency and lawlessness continued to plague federal forces. The most significant of these insurgent factions was the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, officially a part of Russia, but de facto independent since a conference in 1990. An attempt at reintegrating the rogue republic in the middle of the decade had met with a humiliating defeat at the hands of Chechen fighters. In the meanwhile, a former KGB agent by the name of Vladimir Putin had swiftly climbed the political rung, getting appointed as Yeltsin's chief of security, and in 1999 as prime minister. By the end of the decade, the stage was set for Russia's new prime minister, Vladimir Putin, to take advantage of the situation in Chechnya and exploit it for his own political gain, creating the conditions that would lead to his long-lasting rule. Over the last 2 decades, Putin's leadership has been defined by strategies he first used during the Second Chechen War. To understand how Putin came to power and held it, it is vital to examine the events that transpired within Russia during the conflict known as the Second Chechen War. Before we can examine the Second Chechen War and its impact on Vladimir Putin's rise to power, we must first understand the context behind it. On December 16, 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, bringing an end to 70 years of control over Eastern Europe and Asia. From its corpse came 15 independent nations born from the Soviet Socialist Republic. Some of the nations included were the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan, to name a few. These nations had national identities and a majority of their own ethnic group. However, some of these republics were subdivided into autonomous Soviet Socialist republics, such as Karelia. In the wake of the Soviet Union's collapse, many of these chased their own aspirations of independence, especially those in Russia. This movement was quickly identified by the new Russian government as a threat to national stability, and measures were taken to combat it. The Russian President Yeltsin and his government would offer a series of deals and guarantees of partial autonomy, satisfying most of the republics, yet by 1994, one particular republic still refused to back down. The Chechen Republic, a tiny 17,500 square kilometer territory, comprising just a 1,000th of Russia's territory and a 25th of its population, would not buckle. Composed mostly of ethnic Chechens, the Republic had been saddled with an ineffective government and a lacking police force. Banditry and crime ran rampant within the Republic, with thefts of military equipment and kidnappings becoming commonplace. The crime within the republic threatened to spread to the neighboring Republic of Dagestan. To add, Chechnya was situated in a vital position within the Caucasus, separating the east and west coasts. Russian rail and oil ran through Chechnya, making establishing control over the rogue republic a matter of not just security, but also economic growth. Of course, the prospect of Chechen sovereignty was an affront to Russian unity and the authority of the government. Dialogue would break down. Russia would fund and support pro-Russian Chechen groups, inciting a civil war, but the separatists would come out victorious. So in December of 1994, Russian troops would move into Chechnya in an attempt to reintegrate the state and eliminate the government of separatist leader Dudayev. Almost 100,000 Russian soldiers moved into Chechnya, fighting to take the capital of Grozny. However, Chechen forces proved harder to dislodge than expected. Russian forces would obliterate the capital of Grozny with artillery and bombing, causing much of the population to abandon the city. The conflict was so brutal that Russian morale quickly reached near rock bottom. To make matters worse, the majority of the Chechen forces in Grozny, some 9,000 to 10,000 men, had escaped into the countryside. Unable to pacify the countryside, and with the toll both on the front and back, home, mounting, Russia signed a ceasefire, leaving the Chechens victorious on August 31st, 1996. However, Chechnya continued to prove an issue for the Russian government, as without the capital city of Grozny, unemployment ran rampant within the republic. This led to the issue of banditry and crime becoming even worse than it had been before the conflict. Kidnappings were commonplace, with high ransoms being demanded at threat of the victims' lives. The republic was filled with former separatist fighters and warlords, each vying over the resources of the nation. In 1997, the Chechen government would officially declare the state an Islamic republic, introducing Sharia law and attracting the attention of Islamic groups and nations across the world. Mujahideen fighters and others, many of whom had years of experience fighting the Russians in Afghanistan, would flow into the nation. In the meantime, a series of bombings in neighboring Dagestan would begin to turn public opinion once again on the conflict. Finally, a joint incursion by Chechens and Islamic fighters into Dagestan to aid another separatist movement would invoke the intervention of Russian federal forces. In Dagestan, the locals did not join the rebels, but instead formed militias to support the government and fight off the separatists. The group of fighters would make their way back into Chechnya under assault by Russian forces, conveniently escaping into the relative safety of the republic. However, it is suspected by some that Russian forces used this as a pretense for war, along with a series of alleged Chechen bombings across Russia and in Moscow, which left around 350 dead. Whatever the case, by late 1999, public opinion was firmly supportive of another intervention in Chechnya, giving Russia the opportunity to attempt once more to rein in the rogue republic. Now, during this period, a little-known figure at the time, Vladimir Putin, was discreetly maneuvering himself up the political hierarchy. A former KGB agent, Vladimir Putin, was quoted describing the fall of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. Since the event, however, he had indeed been busy rising to become head of the FSB, Russia's successor of the KGB.